Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. In my last video, I compared Behrooz Tabani, who was unable to make it to the Olympia this year, to this year's top 5 finisher, Andrew Jacked. I was trying to answer the broader question of where would Behrooz have placed at this year's Mr. Olympia. First, I started with asking, could he have placed top 5? I don't think I'm really spoiling anything if we had to move on to this video, but be sure to watch part 1 if you haven't already. But anyway, top 5 seemed to be a little out of Behrouz's reach, but I do think he would place pretty high at the Olympia had he made it. I think the best placing to start out with is 8th, because his old rival Rafael Brandao took that spot. And then his current kind of sort of rival, William Bonac, who beat him at this year's Impro Classic, was 7th. And he may have beat him at the Impro Classic, but Behrooz got the dub at the Dubai Pro, so they're technically 1-1 on wins now. So Bonac had to be added to this comparison. And I did a comparison of Hunter and Behrooz last year, so why not add him in as well? After all, he was 6th this year. So with this lineup, we will be comparing Behrooz to the 8th, 7th, and 6th place finishers in order to try and answer the question, where would Behrooz have placed at the 2024 Mr. Olympia? We will be using his latest version this season, the one we used in the last video, the 2024 Dubai Pro version. And we will be comparing them to the Olympia versions of Rafael, William, and Hunter. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into part 2 of answering this question. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe for more videos just like this one. Starting this comparison with the front double right out of the gate, Behrooz is doing very well. The front poses are very shape focused, and that's right up Behrooz and Rafael's alleys. As far as shape is concerned, I would say Behrooz is actually the best overall, even with the big lower body drop off. However, that still is a big hurdle to jump. But just from the waist up, that lat to waist ratio is unmatched even by Rafael Brandao. And Behrooz has very good arms as well. However, Rafael is not really that far behind in regards to shape. We know that he is one of those top massive class guys. Rafael has great arms too, but what sells me on him for first is the balance. His quads are some of the best in the world, and Behrooz are by far the weakest up here. And no, it's not just about the quads themselves, it's about the balance. Behrouz's upper body shape is better to me, but upper-lower balance is actually a big part of overall shape. So with much better quads, great upper body shape, and arms, I have Rafael actually taking this first pose, with Behrooz just barely behind in that runner-up spot. Rafael combines more mass with a little less shape for the superior balance, not just top to bottom, but of all these elements. Behrooz is stellar, but it's just limited to the waist up. After these two, there is quite a big drop-off. Hunter and William don't win shows and place well on their shape, and we can see why. But since both guys have awful shape, there's no reason to not go with the bigger guy with the better body parts for the third place spot. I don't like the vacuum, but Hunter has the bigger, better legs, and the bigger arms at this point since Bonac is downsized. Overall, Bonac just looks a little too beat up and too withered. His lat to waist ratio is even worse than Hunter's, the legs are fading, which leaves the arms as the highlight, and that's just not enough. So as these guys appear on screen from left to right is my ranking for this pose. Like the front double, the front lat is a shape pose first and foremost, and it's separated into two tiers. You have two guys with some of the best shape in the open IFBB, and then you have the other two with some of the worst shape. And I'm actually going to keep every placing the same. Once again, for first and second, it comes down to Rafa and Behrooz. Rafa has the much better lower body and balance, but Behrooz has the advantage upstairs. Usually, I would say Behrooz did enough because this is one of the best upper bodies in this pose, bar none. But when Rafa comes along with a more than solid upper half, but obliterates Behrooz in the lower body, I just don't think Behrouz's upper body pulls enough weight. And as far as third and fourth, I'm going with Hunter for third because he has slightly wider lats and a slightly smaller waist. William is a little too rectangular for me up top, and the legs are worse than Hunter's. They're both pretty bad, however. They're closer to each other than they were in the last pose, but they suck more altogether in this shot. But as I said, I'm keeping my ranking intact on this one, so Bonac is last yet again. Now we have the first side pose and a much more competitive one. Not everyone in this pose is in the running for first, but they all bring a great pose, which is more than I could say about the previous two. I do think the weakest guys up here, however, which does say a lot, are Bonac and Hunter. Hunter is so polished everywhere and big overall, but his pecs are very lackluster, definitely the weakest and skinniest up here. Bonac is smaller and more compact, but he has better pecs. And the side leg, I gotta go with Hunter because he's pretty shredded but bigger overall. Bonac has more pop and is drier, but the hamstring drop is just too small. In the midsection, you definitely have to go with Hunter. He's showcasing those shredded obliques. I'd go with Bonac in the arm and delt though, because his delt is similar, but that bicep peak is insane. And finally in the chest, you have to go with Bonac. Now there's not as much difference between his pecs and Hunter's. Hunter has a much bigger frame and much more mass compared to Bonac overall. So even his skinnier pecs hold up fairly well. I actually think with his bigger frame and more mass, he compares to the rest of the group better, but he still loses to Bonac, which is an interesting outcome. So yeah, I do have to put him just barely behind Bonac. I've always been a fan of Bonac's side chest admittedly, and Hunter has perhaps the more complete pose, but I'm just going with the guy with the better namesake since this pose is close. But after that, I don't see Bonac getting quite to the level of the other two, simply because the other two are much bigger frame and mass-wise, and they don't leave the pecs on the table like Hunter. Like I said, I think William is closer to Hunter than the other two, so I'm not really going to compare him to the rest. I think the difference between Bonac and Rafa and Behrooz is actually just the most apparent when you just glance at them, because you can see the size difference right off the bat. Anyway, that does leave Rafa and Behrooz. This is a coin flip. First of all, I like Brandau's posing a lot more. I think Behrooz squatting down that much is just so over the top. As far as the actual substance is concerned of the lower body though, it's really close. Behrooz is more shredded, but honestly because Brandau is so much fuller, I'm going with him. Then in the upper limb, there isn't much difference here. I think Behrooz looks a little bit bigger here though, so I'm giving him the nod, but that doesn't really matter a whole lot in the grand scheme of things. What does matter though is the chest. Behrooz wins the chest by a small margin simply because he's thicker all the way up to the clavicle. If this was Brandau from the Arnold Classic where he was bursting full, I think he would have won this area and honestly probably the pose. Right now I see this as a 50-50 split. Brandau wins the lower body by a small amount with Behrooz doing the same in the upper half. But since the upper body is more important and the side leg doesn't lag far enough behind, I'm going with Behrooz for the narrow win. You have to admire Raphael's pose though, it's by far my favorite up here, probably not the technical and objective winner in most circumstances however. Let's give Bonac some love now. He's been eating down the lower placings, but he catapults himself ahead of all the young guns in the rear double. First off, his lower body is by far the best up here. His quad sweeps are great, the hams are very dug out, and the glutes are the most detailed up here, even against Behrooz. And as far as the back, there really isn't a dominant one up here. I would still say though that Bonac is at least second best. He has some of the best detail here through the upper back, but that's not as clear in the lower back, and obviously he's not the widest guy, but he's the Swiss Army knife of the pose. He does everything you ask. He has the best lower body just outright with the best elements comprising that. He has mountainous arms and delts and one of the most solid backs up here, so he gets first in this pose. After that, I have to go with Behrooz. If Bonac doesn't have the best back, then it's Behrooz. He doesn't have the maturity of Bonac and all those little details, but he brute forces his way to a good point by just being peeled. But I'm not super impressed with the lower body simply because he could do better. The glutes don't sport that many lines, and this definitely has something to do with posing because we all know how shredded he is. And I wish he would show the hamstrings off more because they're peeled, they're just tucked away. Again, a posing mistake. With the shreds downstairs though, and one of the two best backs here, I see him as a top contender in this pose, landing in second. Between Brandau and Hunter, I was so torn that I decided to consult their videos. Here in their pics from the NBC News Online website, they're both underwhelming looking. Hunter has a little more detail through the back, but his back also looks a little more sparse because his lat insertions are pretty weak. Raphael has good fullness though, but not good detail. But in the lower body, he actually does have more detail. They're both watery, but we can see more of Rafa's hamstrings, and overall his thighs are massive. So anyway, here are the screenshots from their videos for reference. This is still a tough call, but I'm going with Hunter. Raphael has that more aesthetic back, he's more filled in top to bottom, and with the more filled in lats, he has the better V-taper. But the detail is the most important aspect, and Hunter has a little more back detail. I think Rafa's back is still just too new and too unrefined to place well in a pose like this. He's getting there, but right now in this group, he's fourth. Now the rear lat spread is definitely a harder one to judge. In a picture comparison, especially one with a bigger lineup, it's hard to get the full and accurate scope of the entire lineup and each individual stature that is present. I can tell you right now though that I think in every circumstance, Bonac is the odd man out here. It's no longer a detail game, it's a width game. And all these guys are at least a couple inches taller than Bonac, and structurally he's very narrow, even for 5'7". And it's not just the width, but the back is a bit mangled looking. He doesn't have the best detail in this particular pose like he used to, and he's injured one of the lats, they look misshapen, and he's narrow on top of all that, and that's a clear recipe for fourth, even though he does still have the best lower body. After that, I really think it's largely interchangeable, but here's the order I have them in: Behrooz third, Brandau second, Hunter first. All of them are very similar width-wise, which makes this very close overall. Behrooz is the smallest in the lower body, but he's the most detailed overall. Hunter's a bit watery downstairs, and honestly, Rafa's bigger overall, so he could take first. I personally just like Hunter's shape to his lats a bit more. His back definitely looks a lot thicker than it used to. All in all, I don't really have strong feelings on this one way or another. Behrooz or Rafa could be first, and I can make arguments for all of them and agree with you. All of them are fairly solid here, so solid that I think it comes down to personal preference, and that is my personal ranking, so I'm just running with it. We're finishing up on the side poses here with the side try, and we have a big mix-up from the side chest. However, I see this as pretty straightforward. Starting from the bottom up, I'm going with Bonac, but he's only slightly behind Behrooz Tabani. Bonac has done this pose better, but Behrooz is so low because his posing is awful. Still, he has a much bigger and better side leg and the better abs. Bonac still wins the midsection because he keeps it locked in, even with those messy abs, and Behrooz is just kind of letting it hang out. Evident by the doughy obliques, but he still has the better abs. Behrooz also has the fuller pecs though, and the thicker arm as a whole. His delta is much bigger and impact or striations, and his tricep is more visible. But if William had given himself a fair shot, I think he would have ended up winning the namesake of the pose. But overall, with Behrooz being bigger and having more details, he does a lot even though he also leaves posing on the table. And I'm also just not jiving with Bonak's pose right now. This was 2017 Bonak, I'd take that just about over everyone here, but this Bonak is just mid. Behrooz is going to take a narrow third here because of all those aforementioned pluses and Bonak's cons. And then I have Rafael Brandao in a surprisingly close second to Hunter, who I have taking the pose. Hunter just has that wow factor, and honestly, it comes down to the tricep. The side leg is close, I have Brandao taking it overall, but Hunter is sharper until you get to the glute. Then in the midsection, this is actually basically a wash. Hunter really worked on keeping the overall stomach locked in, and that belly button as well. Rafael does have slightly more separated abs though, but really not enough to sway the whole thing. But he definitely has enough thickness in the pecs to conclusively win there against Hunter's frail chest. And in the arm, they're both really thick and have that striated delt, but Hunter has one of the best triceps in the world. He's easily double the size of Rafa and has that feathering in there. Overall, Rafael is thick and streamlined. Hunter is less thick, but has a much better tricep and is still fairly streamlined himself. I honestly could give this to Rafa. Put his fuller Arnold Classic package up here and I think he could do it. I see the argument, but with that it factor, the improvement in looking streamlined, and of course the tricep, I have Hunter on top of our second side pose, which is a big change since he placed 4th in the last one. Next we have the abs and thighs, and believe it or not, but this is a pretty subpar pose for everyone. First off, I don't think I need to tell you that things are separated into 2 tiers here. We have Behrooz and Rafa who have issues but at least can hit it head on, and then Hunter and Bonak who can't even do that. We know that the latter 2 guys have pretty wide waists and pretty poor abs. Sure, Hunter's quads are freaky, and yes, he wins the lower half against everyone up here actually, but the stomach is way too much for him to take anything more than 3rd. And personally, I don't even have him there. I have Bonak slightly above him. His quads are weaker than Hunter's, but the abs matter to me a bit more, and Hunter is somehow worse than Bonak. He is worse in terms of the stomach control, the appearance of the waistline, and the actual separation in the abs. This pick from Hunter is from the finals, where the rest of them are from prejudging. We'll talk more about this later, but to put it simply, he fell off at finals, but this was the only picture to go off of. So this pick is not giving him the best shake, but in this instance, I doubt it changes much. He's going to suffer with his poor abs and waistline regardless of his peak. And as stated, somehow Bonak is just a little bit better in the midsection, so he escapes last in the abs and thighs. That leaves Brandao and Behrooz once again because there is no way Bonak, even though he's in 3rd, is touching these 2. And this argument boils down to whether or not Behrouz's abs are pulling enough weight to offset the legs. Quads to quads, this isn't close. And this is also Rafa at finals, where like Hunter, he was pretty off. So not the best shake overall, but still, he doesn't even need to be in his best peak to absolutely obliterate Behrooz in the lower body. But Behrooz wins the abs portion. His abs are a bit more deeply separated and his waist is a touch smaller. I'd even say his taper is just barely better. Brandao isn't bad, he's just fairly mid. He's just not gifted with the best ab genetics. He's rocking the 4-pack, but he's still pretty separated, and obviously his waist and taper are still solid, even if Behrooz takes these areas. With that said, Rafa holds up in the abs and easily wins the quads. He has the more balanced and complete pose, so I'm giving this to him. I know Behrooz has the better abs, and yes, the abs are the most important, but it's still an abs and thighs pose. If his quads had literally anything else to them, I'd be giving him the pose, but as it stands, they're small and oddly blurry. So he leaves the door open for Brandao's fairly mid pose to pass him on the basis of having a better sum of parts. And finally, we have the most muscular. I want to preface that this pose is definitely a 180 from the last pose. The last pose was poor to mid for everyone. Here, they all have very good poses, but of course, there can only be one winner. For my winner, I have Rafael taking this final pose. He's kind of doing everything right. First off, he's one of the bigger and taller guys structurally. Second, he's filled out his frame enough that being taller is no longer a detriment. And that's actually a great combo to have now, being both muscular and tall. The chest is thick, the arms and delts pop, and the quads aren't taking a back seat here. There are major selling point even in this crab variation. And he has some great details from the front. The chest is grainy and has that major minor pec split. The delts have all those small details that we long for in today's era of pointy and smooth delts, and the quads are very separated. He's big, the biggest guy up here, he's detailed, he's complete. There really isn't anything more you can ask for. Closely behind him though, I have Bonak, which is surprising. He's the smallest guy up here on a structural basis, but he maximizes every square inch of his frame that he is given. It's hard to believe that this shot used to be even bigger and better than it is now, but of course
course, it's still solid today. He's bubbly and so 3D, and that factor along with all those details make up for a shortcoming structurally. Being the old guy has its perks when it comes to detail, and Bonac is the most detailed up here. I could really see him being first. I think if it was a younger Bonac, he easily would have been, but he's not the biggest structurally, which really undermines him in this lineup. Next, I have a decision that is going to make a lot of people upset. Remember though, all these guys are fantastic in this post. Just because I place a guy last doesn't mean he's not great. But taking that last place spot is going to be Behrooz, and it's because of the legs. This isn't even Hunter's best variation of the pose, and he's still holding up very well in the arms and delts, but the chest does leave a lot to be desired. But once again, Behrooz gets completely outdone in the quads. It's not even close. And I can look past that in a pose like the front double, but in the most muscular where you're supposed to be thickly developed and detailed everywhere, that's very hard to do. I can't do it. Maybe you can because Behrooz does have an insane upper body, better than Hunter's, but in this case, it further exacerbates his major imbalance to me. Like I said, fourth isn't such a loss in this pose, but when Behrooz is missing half his body, I gotta knock him down just a little bit, so he's finishing this comparison last in the final pose. Alright, now I'm going to reveal the final scorecard, and remember, the lowest score wins. In fourth was William Bonac, scoring 25 points, winning one pose. Not too far ahead of him was Hunter Labrada in third, with 2 poses won and 22 points scored. Then in the runner-up spot, we had our challenger, Behrooz Tabani, with 18 points scored, but just 1 pose won. And in a surprising first place with 4 poses won was Rafael Brandao, winning half of all poses and scoring 14 points. Now I want to discuss everyone individually because there is actually a lot of nuance between Behrooz and a couple of these guys. That's my loose ranking as a whole, but I want to dig just a little bit deeper. And I'm not really going to provide an official concrete ranking to further complicate this video. I don't want to turn this video into a big what if and start changing the results around. I'm simply going to go one by one and determine if Behrooz can defeat each guy. First up is Bonac, and to me this is an easy choice. Bonac beat Behrooz at the Impro Classic, but I disagreed with that pretty heavily. And at the Dubai Pro, they were both a little bit better, but Behrooz won that one. Now I think Bonac brought his best version to this year's Olympia. I still don't think that's enough, however. He's technically more complete than Behrooz, but that shape factor on Behrooz takes care of every gap. In the front shots, the quad should make Behrooz vulnerable, but Bonac is so bad that Behrooz takes the front double, front lat, and abs and thighs automatically. Then Behrooz takes at least one of the back poses, definitely the rear lat spread, and that automatically wins Behrooz the comparison just based on poses. But the rear double is kinda up for debate, so is the side try, but it went to Behrooz in my comparison. And the most muscular is solid on both guys, but that is one shot I'd give to Bonac more often than not. So at worst for Behrooz, it's 5-3, probably more like 6-2. Bonac is complete and has better legs, but lags way too far behind in shape, and Behrooz is still very complete and conditioned outside of the quads. And he's bigger than wider than Bonac overall. It's kind of the same thing in regards to Hunter, but with an extra twist. First up, just as is, taking the other competitors out, Behrooz placed ahead of Hunter in 5 poses. However, remember what I said earlier on, Hunter majorly fell off at finals. Hunter was ahead of Andrew Jack at prejudging, but at finals he was in 6th. So yes, I do think Behrooz could have beat Hunter, and that puts him within the top 6. Now, would I do that? Honestly, if Behrooz was consistent on both nights of the show, I think he would have done enough for me to put him ahead of Hunter. However, if we're asking what actually would have happened, and where the judges would have put Behrooz, I highly doubt it would have been in front of Hunter. For one, Hunter's last name is Labrada. 2, putting Behrooz in the top 6 is a waste of a spot from a business perspective, and we know that this is a business first. Even if Behrooz got to America this year, what are the odds he could continue to do that? Probably very low. And the judges and higher-ups aren't going to be too open to having a guy in that top 6 that's very volatile in terms of travel restrictions. It's one thing if you're Hadi and you're a top 2 competitor and a former Arnold and Olympia champion, and obviously Hadi's been able to get here for multiple years in a row. For Behrooz, they're going to be harsher on him, and who knows, maybe they don't place him top 6 no matter what. Personally, I would, politics aside, I'd have him beating Hunter. I have him winning more poses against prejudging Hunter, and finals Hunter was pretty bad, so Behrooz could have expanded on his margin. That's what I would do. I'm not saying it would happen, but I would put Behrooz above Hunter. Now we have Rafael, who I actually saved for last because he technically won this comparison. I think it does make a lot of sense, even though he actually ended up placing last on the official scorecard out of this group here. First off, I think Behrooz changes the lineup. If you had another shapely guy in there, it helps make the more mass monster type of guys look like the odd guys out. And then second, Rafael was actually really high at prejudging. He was 7th at prejudging and maybe should have been fighting for 6th. However, he took a massive dive at finals. He was really flat, so automatically a close pose probably ends up going to Behrooz if we did this comparison with Rafael's finals version. He won 6 poses over Behrooz in this comparison, but we can take away away the front poses since they were very close, and that automatically would make it 4-4 without even looking at the other poses. So all in all, if I really broke this down one-on-one, I think prejudging Brandao would beat Behrooz narrowly, but I do mean narrowly. I'm not going to redo the entire comparison, but since these guys are so similar, it would be close to 50-50. They both have great shape, but Brandao has much better legs and more size, but Behrooz is more conditioned. However, if I'm saying it would be razor close at prejudging, then once we factor in the finals version, I don't think Brandao would beat Behrooz on both nights of the Olympia. And since one night would be close either way, and Behrooz would win more clearly on night 2, he would take the average and the better placing. And Behrooz gets better at every finals, so I don't think this conclusion is a stretch. He's famously always shredded, that's his thing. And I think it's proof of concept that Brandao did in fact get beat by the other two. Theoretically, he should have been pushing Hunter at finals if Brandao had just stayed consistent. Again, Brandao was 7th going into finals. Then he could have taken points away from Hunter because Hunter got worse at finals, and Brandao could have finished a lot closer to 6th, maybe even in that 6th place. But he was so bad that Bonac and Hunter were able to beat him overall. And I think Behrooz easily beats Bonac, so by that logic, he should have beaten Brandao. Now, as far as Hunter, like I said, I would have had Behrooz beating Hunter, but it would be fairly close for sure. But is that what Behrooz would have done? No. So those are my answers. As far as where I would have placed Behrooz, I would say 7th up to 6th. Personally, I'm going with 6th more days than 7th. As far as where I think the judges would have placed him, I say hard 7th, maybe even behind Bonac after that odd decision at the Impro Classic. I think any way you slice it, Behrooz is definitely placing very, very close to the top 5. I would have put him just one place outside of that, but maybe the judges would place him a little further back. But I firmly believe Behrooz is a top 8 guy at the very minimum, much closer to 7th or 6th. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. Where would you have placed Behrooz Tabani at this year's Mr. Olympia? Let me know down in the comments. And if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more. And if you guys want to support the channel even further and want to get your hands on some high quality supplements, be sure to head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Get Alexia.